Welcome back to the program. We're glad you've stayed with us. This is the big story right on KTN News. So the big question tonight is Parliament policing the watchdog? This after two journalists from the People Daily newspaper are summoned by Parliament to appear before the Powers and Privileges Committee to answer certain questions with regards to an article they wrote or was published on Monday, which was titled House of Bribes. We're going to talk about that shortly. But first, let me bring in Senator Moses Kajwang, who also doubles up as the Senate Chair of the Public Accounts Committee there. Good evening, Senator. Welcome to the program. And there's a question that I posed to Honorable Maure earlier with regards to how parliamentary committees conduct themselves. And there is a committee that tabled the sugar report today. It's the same committee that tabled the same report, but in the preliminary stages 3 weeks ago. And this is what the Speaker of the National Assembly had to say with regards to this committee. He said that the investigation then was lost when members started hugging and, kissing those whom they had called to grill. So the first question is there a certain way members of Parliament, especially those in these committees, are supposed to conduct themselves?
Thank you and good evening. We have a bicameral parliamentary system with the Senate and the National Assembly. I would tell you that in the Senate where I come from, we might be having fewer problems as opposed to the National Assembly. And it is not really an issue of capacity or anything. It is just the sheer numbers. For example, I chair a committee of 9 members. That is a number that even if you bought a pizza, you can share it out amongst the members. But in contrast, the Sugar Committee, chaired by my friend, the two members from the National Assembly, it was a committee of 38 people. A committee that most often invited friends that would number more than 20, and friends to the committee would be noisier and would be more inquisitive than the members of the committee.
So you're saying there's a problem with the National Assembly
alone? I just want to lay the framework that I'm just laying the framework that the numbers sometimes become a disadvantage when it comes to the work of committees. But we cannot belittle the usefulness of committees in a presidential system that we have. Because without committees, then Parliament would be sitting as plenary on every single issue that comes before it. So committees are supposed to bring about some efficiency in the manner in which Parliament does its work. Committees are supposed to bring about expertise. I'll give you an example. The physical planning bill is before Parliament right now. And physical planning is a very specialized area. For all members to make informed decisions and debate on it, a fisherman like me who comes from Homa Bay, for me to make an informed decision on the physical planning bill, I will need a committee of specialists to scrutinize it and present a report to the House saying that this is a good bill or this is a bad bill. So committees are extremely important. The issue of numbers can be looked at, but finally, there is also the issue of leadership and the manner in which committees were constituted. Remember that this Parliament was constituted at a time when the political environment was very fragile. And so you had a situation where the majority of committees in the National Assembly and in the Senate, the leadership was determined at State House. It was not about competency. It was about balancing political party interests. And with the exception of the Public Accounts Committee, which I chair in the Senate, and the Public Accounts and Public Investments and Implementation Committees in the National Assembly, the rest of the committees, the majority party, Jubilee, sat in a parliamentary group meeting and decided how they are going to share out the spoils. That also has an implication on the leadership and the quality of workmanship that comes out of those committees.
We're going to talk about the matter of duplication shortly, but let me get the reaction from Honorable Maure on your sentiments there. And Honorable Maure, as you bite into that, I want to quote some of the, a quote from the report that was published on Monday, but these two journalists who have been summoned by the same National Assembly, that they claimed that about 500 million Kenya shillings exchanged hands in questionable dealings between members of parliament and various parties under probe by the 12th Parliament. Is it something that shocks you?
Now, I think it may not be shocking, but what happens about the story of bribery, you know very well there are no receipts. So it is difficult to quantify, apart from getting the hearsay evidence or confessions by those people who have interacted with the members of Parliament.
So is there bribery? Let me begin with that.
I think I would be the last person to defend the issues or tales of bravery if they are there. I am not in a position to deny or defend my colleagues, but I have no evidence to the effect that there has been or there is corruption.
So we're going to
But
talk
from
about
the
whether...
matters that are actually from the way the speaker did the ruling,
Yes.
you could tell, we are trying to correct some ship that was sinking and trying to steer it into the right path. And the right path is that of the parliament as an institution to rise above those kind of suspicions. My assertion is that those suspicions cannot be far-fetched in any way. But that what we need is what Parliament avoided in the last Parliament when a story was brought in, somebody like an ombudsman within Parliament. In the House of Commons is called the Commissioner for Standards. Commissioner for Standards is the one who enforces ethics on members when they go and misbehave. It is the Commissioner for Standards office which you go and report those kind of rumors of money changing hands between members and the people they're interviewing or the businesses that are involved or the organization they're investigating. So we are in a situation whereby, as I told you again, if you go to the Constitution, you'll find Parliament or its committees, they have the same power like that of a High Court. Now, if you have a power like a High Court, you kind of have the capacity to scare and intimidate witnesses the same way a High Court would. And unfortunately, there is very little space. There's a lot of space between a suspect or whoever it is that goes before court and the judge. You don't find them interacting the way we are trying to prohibit members from interacting with the people they are investigating. As I have also said, most members of the committees, of departmental committees, in the last two parliaments, they have had a lot of interactions with the people whom they're investigating. As I tell you, I've had an experience of the previous of 7th, 8th, and 9th. We never had this kind of rogue behavior by members.
Would you attribute that to the sheer numbers of members in these committees, like what Senator Kajwang has alluded to, or is it a problem of leadership within Parliament?
It is not about the numbers. It is about the story of what has been happening in Kenya in general. The difference between corruption in the US and Kenya is that there is corruption happening in the US almost every minute. But the difference between Kenya and the US is that in the US or in the West, if you are a caught, punishment is administered. In Kenya, you literally get away with it. If you are a politician and you go and get involved in dirty deals, and you attempt to run for public office, you will find they will go to court to say that you don't enforce Chapter 6. So until when you will have members of Parliament agree to be vetted like any other member of the public, because I find them members very excited when they are vetting people who the president is appointing, and they themselves would never agree to go through the same system of vetting or to subject themselves.
Yes, Honorable More, let me bring in Senator Kajwang into this. Senator, will you think, or I'd like to hear your view on this, will you think like bribery is a main concern within these parliamentary committees? Do you think it's a major concern?
Well, I would say that the media plays an important role in supporting parliamentary work, particularly the oversight duty. Many of the inquiries that Parliament undertake are as a result of media exposés. And so, as a senator and a member of Parliament, I would be the last one to take a big stick and administer it on the media, because it is a very important partner in the governance, in the oversight, and in the legislative exercise. The summons by the Powers and Privileges Committee that we read about in the media, and just to further expand on what Mheshimiwa Maoka Maore is talking about, the Ombudsman that you'll find in other jurisdictions, when we revised the Powers and Privileges Act, we attempted to give that committee the powers to inquire on issues of ethics and misconduct. In fact, it is in the Powers and Privileges Act that the code of conduct for members of parliament is found. I therefore would wish to assure the media that the journalists who have been invited to the Powers and Privileges Committee, and sometimes use the word summons instead of invitation, I want to believe that this was an invitation for the journalists to come and shed light on the background to the story.
Senator
We must
Kajwang,
protect sources
sorry to cut you short. Sorry
but
to
at
cut
the
you
same
short.
time,
Yes. Actually, the issue on this journalist was raised by one member of parliament from NDBS, that is Robert Pokosen. He said the article was in bad taste and depicted parliament as a corrupt lot. It seems this member of parliament was already taking a stand on this issue. Don't you think if these two journalists appear before this committee tomorrow morning, don't you think they might be coerced to reveal, who their sources are and find themselves in a very tight corner?
I don't expect that to happen because parliamentary committees are agents of parliament as an institution. There is no decision that parliamentary committees will take that are final, that are outside the purview of approval by plenary. And so the comments of an individual member of parliament, no matter how aggrieved he feels, he cannot impose that comment on a committee and impose it on the entire house. I want to assure the journalists that if this matter comes before plenary, those of us who believe in the freedom of the media and the space that journalists require, we will not support any punitive arrangements or any punitive recommendations. But let me also say this. As a member of parliament, I cannot go on air and say that parliament is sanctified and it is an august house without corruption. Parliament exists within the Kenyan context. We have said that corruption is one of the greatest enemies and barriers to development in this country. You cannot expect parliament to be free of corruption. There's corruption in the church, in the judiciary, in parliament, in the police service, in the executive. It is a Kenyan problem. And when we accept that it is a national problem, that is when we can come up with solutions. There could be cases of corruption in parliament. There could be cases of bribery in committees. What is important is for us to seize the moment and attempt to get to the bottom so that those persons who are using parliament as a toll station to make money or to get rich, those persons are exposed and they are removed from leadership and removed from those committees so that we can restore the confidence of Kenyans in parliament, in the county assemblies, and in the various institutions that have been established by the constitution.
Honorable Maure, now that these two...
about the members...
Yes, I'd like you to react to that. Let me just get this from you. Of course, Honorable Kajwang, Senator Kajwang said that this is not a summoning, but an invitation. I'd like to hear your view on the same.
My advice is whether it is summon or an invitation, members of for the state or the journalists, they work very closely with the parliament. Now, if an issue arises where a parliamentary committee wants to raise issues or clarifications, the best advice for those members of the media is to appear before the committees. There is no coercion involved. There is nobody who will force or can ask any journalist to review their source of information. Because the moment you ask them to review their source of information, you will interfere with their work now. But to ask them to appear before the committee is not interference with their work. It is just to shed light on the matters the privileged committee might find necessary. And it is upon the same members to ask a few questions also even to those members. Whether they are not also alarmed, there are those rumors and innuendos and the perceptions of corruption.
Of course,
when you are a member of the parliament, you should be able to be above reproach.
Yes.
As sister's wife.
Only time will tell. We're going to see how the proceedings is going to go down tomorrow in Parliament. But as we conclude, Senator Kajwang, you've talked about the issue of leadership, the issue of sheer numbers of these members of Parliament in the respective parliamentary committees. But there's another concern that most Kenyans have raised, and this has everything to do with duplication. We've seen a lot of committees, from National Assembly and those from the Senate where you sit, where they seem to be duplicating their roles. What do you have to say about that? Because many Kenyans believe there's a wastage of taxpayers' money.
Well, I'd like to say that this is a feature of bicameralism. Since 1963, since independence, at independence we had two chambers. and then the Senate was scrapped. And in the 2010 Constitution, we reintroduced the Senate. So we have two chambers. Bicameralism poses problems, not just for Kenya, but even more advanced democracies. You go to the UK where there's a House of Lords and the House of Commons. You go to the US where you have got Senate and the House of Representatives. An example that most viewers would relate to is the time when Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg was summoned to Congress by both houses. That time when it was said that Cambridge Analytica and Facebook had colluded to invade privacy of citizens and social media users. We saw Mark Zuckerberg appearing before the House of Representatives on day one. And on day two, he was appearing before the Senate. And he was being asked more or less the same questions, but from different perspectives, depending on the various houses.
You don't see that as duplication? You don't see that as duplication,
with the
right?
issue of bicameralism, it was, you would have called it duplication because I watched the proceedings in both houses and it was more or less the same thing. But in the Kenyan context, what the Constitution requires us to do is that when the National Assembly and Senate are looking at the same matter, they must look at it from different lenses. When my committee is looking at a matter, I look at it from the interest of counties. I look at it from the perspective of strengthening and promoting devolution. And that is what should guide us. I don't think as long as we have bicameralism, I don't foresee a situation where we will say that things are perfect and that National Assembly can only do A and Senate can only do B. Remember that the Constitution only limits the legislative powers of both houses. When it comes to representation and oversight, because senators and members of the National Assembly are elected through universal suffrage and popular mandate, they all have almost equal rights in representation and oversight. But when it comes to legislation, the Constitution has drawn very clear lines on the legislation that Senate can undertake and the legislation that the National Assembly can undertake.
Senator Kajwang, let's end it there. And let me give Honorable More the last word on the duplication bit. I believe you have something to say before you wrap up.
No, I think the duplication and the Senate, when the 2010 Constitution created the Senate, it did not give it the mandate it ought to have given it as the upper house. For now, there is quite a lot of limitation on the Senate on what it can legislate on. And it actually confined almost mostly protecting the interests of the counties. It is more like a committee of the National Assembly, specifically to deal with the issue of counties and the money that goes to the counties and their interests. So these others of trying to check or have issues to be investigated by the Senate, supposing you have the National Assembly and the Senate come up with different recommendations, which one do you adopt? So that's why we need to have that clarification, and we need actually the Senate to go slow on some of its matters they are intent on investigating.
Yes, Senator Kajwang, I think Honorable More,
I think we have a responsibility to educate the public, because in the Constitution there is something called mediation, and that mediation was put there to deal with the situation that Mheshimiwa Maoka is talking about. When we have different recommendations coming from different houses, we go through mediation. So I don't want Mheshimiwa to be alarmist, but there is a mechanism within the Constitution for dealing with that. It is called mediation.
You all understand that Kenyans are very much concerned because they feel like, it's the taxpayers that is going to waste. But anyway, many thanks for your input, Senator Moses Kajwang, for your input, as well as Honorable Maoka Maore, Gembe North Member of Parliament, also doubles up as the chair of the CDF. Many thanks for your input, and of course, many thanks for you for watching The Big Story right here on KTN News. My name is Yusuf Ibrahim. Up next is Linda Ogutu with KTN Prime. Stay with us.